Memphis, 1967. Behind the glittering facade of Graceland's most famous romance lay secrets that could destroy the king of rock and roll. What if everything you believed about Elvis and Priscilla's fairy tale love story was carefully orchestrated? Fiction? What if the woman who captured America's heart harbored motives darker than anyone imagined? In a world where fame is currency and trust is a luxury Elvis couldn't afford, one woman held the power to build his empire or burn it to the ground. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Graceland as Elvis stared at the photograph in his trembling hands. It had arrived that morning. No return address, just his name scrawled across expensive cream paper. In the black and white image, Priscilla sat at a cafe in Paris, her head thrown back in laughter, her fingers intertwined with those of a man Elvis had never seen before. The time stamp read 3 days ago, the same day she'd called him from her lonely hotel room, crying about how much she missed him. "Boss, you need to see this." Red West burst through the study doors, his face grim. In his weathered hands, he clutched a manila envelope thick with documents. "That private investigator you hired, he found something." Elvis set the photograph down carefully, his blue eyes never leaving Priscilla's radiant smile. "What kind of something?" "The kind that changes everything." Red spread the papers across the mahogany desk like tarot cards predicting doom. Bank records, hotel receipts, telephone logs, each document a piece of a puzzle Elvis wasn't sure he wanted to complete. The first document made his blood run cold. A wire transfer from Priscilla's account to a number in Switzerland, dated just 2 weeks after their wedding. $50,000 money. She claimed to know nothing about managing. Money, she said, scared her with its vastness. "There's more," Red continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Phone records show calls to the same Swiss number every Tuesday for the past 6 months. Each call lasted exactly 3 minutes." Elvis sank into his leather chair, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders like a shroud. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted with his heart and his secrets, had been playing a game he didn't even know existed. Every tender moment, every whispered confession, every vulnerable midnight conversation, had it all been performance? His mind raced back to their first meeting in Germany, when she was just 14 and he was already drowning in fame. Had she sought him out, or had he found her? The memory, once crystalline in its perfection, now seemed murky, manipulated. The telephone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the silence. Elvis stared at it, knowing without looking at the caller ID that it would be her. Priscilla, calling with her usual evening check-in, her voice sweet as Tennessee honey, asking about his day, professing her love. "Aren't you going to answer it?" Red asked. Elvis reached for the receiver, then stopped. For the first time in their relationship, he wondered what lies would pour from her lips tonight. What performance would she give? What role was she really playing in the grand theater of his life? The ringing stopped. In the silence that followed, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, the man who had everything, realized he might have nothing at all. The woman he loved might be the architect of his destruction, and he had handed her the blueprints himself. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last remnants of his innocence. The Swiss bank's marble lobby gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as Elvis adjusted his sunglasses and pulled his collar higher. Despite the disguise, his hands shook as he approached the mahogany reception desk. 3 days had passed since Red's devastating revelation, 3 days of sleepless nights and mounting paranoia. "I need to speak with someone about account number 7749CH, he said quietly to the pristine blonde receptionist. Her eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering before professional composure returned. "Herr Mueller will see you immediately." The banker's office reeked of old money and older secrets. Heinrich Mueller, a skeleton of a man with glacier blue eyes, spread documents across his desk with surgical precision. Each page revealed another layer of Priscilla's deception, each number another nail in the coffin of their marriage. The account was opened in 1963, Mueller explained, his English crisp despite his accent. The initial deposit was modest $5,000. However, the deposits became substantial after 1967, their wedding year. The year Elvis had legally tied himself to a woman he was beginning to realize he'd never truly known. Who else has access? Elvis's voice cracked like a teenager's. Only one other person. A Herr Joseph Beaulieu. Elvis's world tilted. Joe Beaulieu Priscilla's stepfather, the man who'd supposedly been so reluctant to let his stepdaughter move to Memphis. The man who'd played the protective father, extracting promises from Elvis about marriage and respectability. There's more, Mueller continued, sliding another folder across the polished wood. This account has been funding several interesting ventures. A modeling agency in Rome, a fashion house in Milan, and most curious of all, payments to a private investigation firm in Los Angeles. The room spun as Elvis processed the implications. While he'd been pouring his heart out to Priscilla, sharing his fears about his career, his health, his growing dependence on pills, she'd been feeding information to investigators. Every secret, every vulnerability, every moment of weakness, all documented, all potentially weaponized. His phone buzzed. A text from Priscilla. Missing you terribly. Can't wait to come home to Graceland tomorrow. All my love, P. The irony tasted bitter as copper pennies. That evening, back in his hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, Elvis called his lawyer. The conversation lasted 2 hours and left him emotionally drained, but strategically enlightened. Marvin Mitchelson's voice carried the weight of experience with high-profile divorces. Elvis, if what you're telling me is true, you're not just looking at infidelity. This could be extortion, possibly fraud. But we need more evidence before we make any moves. What kind of evidence? The kind that shows intent, pattern, conspiracy. Mitchelson paused. The kind that proves she married you not for love, but for leverage. Elvis hung up and walked to the window. The lake stretched endlessly before him, dark and mysterious as the woman he'd married. Somewhere across that water, Priscilla was probably crafting her next lie, her next performance. His reflection stared back from the glass, the king of rock and roll, reduced to a pawn in a game he was only beginning to understand. But pawns, Elvis reminded himself, could still become queens if they played their moves right. Tomorrow, he would return to Graceland. Tomorrow, he would pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and for the first time since Germany, Elvis Presley was ready to play chess instead of checkers. The hunt was about to begin. Graceland's grand foyer had never felt more like a stage than the moment Priscilla walked through the front doors. Elvis watched from the top of the staircase as she glided across the marble floor, her movements fluid and calculated as a prima ballerina's. The afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass cast rainbow patterns across her face, and for a heartbreaking moment she looked exactly like the girl he'd fallen in love with in Germany. Darling. Her voice rang with practiced joy as she spotted him. I've missed you so much. The performance began immediately. The rushed steps up the staircase, the perfectly timed stumble that would require his strong arms to catch her, the way she buried her face in his neck and whispered all the right words. Even knowing what he knew, Elvis felt his resolve wavering. Priscilla was, above all else, a masterful actress. How was Paris? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lonely, boring. I couldn't wait to get home to you. She pulled back to look at him, her blue eyes swimming with what appeared to be genuine tears. I have something for you. From her purse, She produced a small wrapped box. Inside lay an antique watch, ornate and expensive. I saw it in an antique shop and thought of you, the inscription. She turned it over to reveal elegant script. To my king, forever yours. Elvis stared at the watch, his mind calculating. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment purchase. This was planned, orchestrated. The perfect gift to dispel any suspicions, to remind him of her devotion. The craftsmanship alone suggested hours of searching, days of preparation. "It's beautiful," he managed, though the words felt like glass in his throat. At evening, they sat in their usual spots in the den, Priscilla curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, while a movie played on the television. To anyone observing, they looked like the perfect couple. But Elvis felt like he was watching a movie himself, studying every gesture, every word for hidden meaning. "Elvis?" Her voice was soft, vulnerable. "Can I tell you something?" His heart hammered. "Of course. I've been thinking about having a baby." She tilted her head to look at him, her expression hopeful and innocent. "I know we've talked about it, but I really think it's time. I want to give you a son." The timing was too perfect, too convenient. A baby would cement their bond legally and financially, would make divorce exponentially more complicated and expensive. It would also provide her with 18 years of guaranteed income and leverage. "That sounds wonderful," he heard himself say, even as his mind screamed warnings. Later that night, as Priscilla slept beside him, Elvis slipped out of bed and into his private study. The manila envelope Red had given him sat in his desk drawer like a ticking bomb. Inside was the private investigator's full report, hundreds of pages documenting a deception so elaborate it took his breath away. The modeling agency in Rome was a front. The fashion house in Milan existed only on paper. But the payments to the Los Angeles investigation firm were very real and very specific. They'd been hired to dig up dirt on Elvis's business associates, his family members, even his friends. In the Memphis Mafia. Most damning of all was a transcript of a phone conversation between Priscilla and an unknown male voice, recorded just 3 weeks ago. "He's getting suspicious." Priscilla's voice was cold, businesslike, nothing like the woman who whispered sweet nothings in his ear. Then accelerate the timeline. Get pregnant. Make it permanent. What if he finds out before then? He won't. He's too blinded by love to see what's right in front of him. Elvis read the transcript 3 times, each pass driving the knife deeper into his heart. The woman sleeping in his bed wasn't his wife, she was his enemy, and she'd been playing the long game from the very beginning. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and walked to the window overlooking the grounds of Graceland, somewhere in the Iceland. Darkness. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, protecting him from fans and photographers. But they couldn't protect him from the threat that shared his bed every night. Tomorrow, he would begin his own performance. Tomorrow, Elvis Presley would become the greatest actor of his career, because the role he was about to play, the devoted husband who suspected nothing, might be the most important performance of his life. The game had changed, but it wasn't over. Not yet. The recording equipment hummed quietly in the hidden compartment behind Elvis's office bookshelf. For 3 weeks, he'd been gathering evidence, playing the role of the oblivious husband while documenting every lie, every deception, every moment that revealed Priscilla's true nature. The small microphones, virtually invisible to the naked eye, had captured conversations that would have destroyed a lesser man's faith in humanity. Tonight was different. Tonight, Elvis had orchestrated the perfect trap. He'd told Priscilla he was flying to Vegas for a last-minute recording session, complete with fake itinerary and a very real departure from Memphis International Airport. But instead of boarding the plane, he doubled back through private channels, using routes known only to his most trusted security team. Now he sat in his own house like a ghost, waiting for his wife to reveal herself completely. The wait wasn't long. At 10:47 p.m., Priscilla's footsteps echoed through the hallway outside his study. She moved with purpose, no longer the graceful glide she performed for his benefit. These were the steps of someone with a mission. Through the two-way mirror he'd had installed months ago, Elvis watched his wife of 3 years systematically photograph the contents of his private safe. Financial documents, recording contracts, personal correspondence, all of it captured by her small professional camera. She worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The phone rang. Priscilla answered without hesitation. "It's done. I have everything you need." Her voice carried none of the soft Southern accent she'd cultivated for him. Instead, she spoke with the crisp efficiency of a business transaction. "Excellent. The lawyer is prepared to file tomorrow. With these documents, we can claim financial mismanagement, possibly even mental incompetence." "What about the pregnancy?" "Angle? Still useful, but this is better, faster, less risk of him catching on before we can move." Elvis's blood turned to ice water. Mental incompetence. They weren't just planning to divorce him. They were planning to have him declared unfit, to seize control of his entire empire while he was still alive. "The pills help our case," Priscilla continued, her voice matter of fact. "His dependency, the mood swings, the paranoia. My testimony about his erratic behavior will be very convincing. The pills, the prescription medications she'd encouraged him to take for his anxiety, his insomnia, his stage fright. Pills she'd personally brought him, pills she'd counted out for him, pills she'd insisted would help him sleep better, perform better, feel better. How long before you can get him committed? 6 months, maybe less if we can document a few public incidents. I've already planted stories with some journalists about his strange behavior at Graceland." Elvis gripped the edge of his desk so hard. His knuckles went white. Every headline he'd dismissed as tabloid nonsense, every rumor about his health and mental state, Priscilla had been the source. What about his people? The Memphis Mafia? They suspect nothing. They're more concerned about protecting him from outside threats. They don't see the threat sleeping in his bed every night. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, each revelation more devastating than the last. When Priscilla finally hung up, Elvis remained frozen in his hiding place, watching as she carefully returned his documents to the safe, reset the combination, and transformed back into the loving wife. Within minutes, she was calling him in Vegas, her voice thick with manufactured longing. "I miss you so much, baby. I can't wait for you to come home to me." After she went to bed, Elvis emerged from his hiding place like a man resurrected from the dead. The recording equipment had captured everything, enough evidence to destroy her in any court of law, enough proof to reclaim his life and his empire. But as he sat in his study, surrounded by the detritus of his shattered marriage, Elvis realized something that chilled him more than Priscilla's betrayal. He was no longer sure who he could trust. If his wife of 3 years could deceive him so completely, who else in his inner circle might be playing a longer game? The Memphis Mafia, his business managers, his record label executives, anyone with access to his life, had the potential to be another Priscilla. The paranoia she'd claimed as evidence of his mental instability was actually justified caution in a world where even love could be weaponized. Elvis poured himself a drink and began making calls. It was time to clean house, time to separate the loyal from the opportunistic, time to reclaim his kingdom from the pretenders who thought they could steal it. From within, the king was about to remind everyone exactly why he wore the crown. First, he had one final performance to give, and this time, Priscilla would be the audience who never saw it coming. The truth about Elvis and Priscilla's marriage died with them both, buried beneath decades of official biographies and carefully crafted public narratives. But those who looked closely at the evidence, the sudden changes in Elvis's behavior in The late 1960s, the mysterious financial transactions, the convenient timing of certain career decisions might glimpse a different story entirely. Perhaps the king of rock and roll's greatest performance wasn't on any stage, but in his own home, playing the devoted husband while maneuvering to protect his empire from the person closest to him. Perhaps his legendary paranoia wasn't mental illness, but survival instinct in a world where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The real story of Graceland's most famous marriage may be darker, more complex, and more dangerous than anyone ever imagined. Ready to uncover more secrets from the king's hidden life? Subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive access to untold stories, rare documents, and the truth behind the legends that shaped rock and roll history.